They always say family is supposed to lift you up, right? Family is supposed to be your first support system, your first cheerleaders, the people who see your potential even before the world does. That's what I believed growing up. And I believed it more than anything when it came to my grandfather. He was the strongest person I knew, hardworking, respected, and the founder of a company that everyone in our family admired. It was the company that paid for the houses we lived in, the schools we went to, the clothes we wore. It was his legacy, his pride, his life. And I always thought one day, I'd be part of carrying that legacy forward. I didn't want it handed to me. I was willing to work for it. I thought they knew that. I thought they saw me. But somehow, everyone was preparing for a future I wasn't included in. I didn't realize things had shifted until the day my cousins came into the living room excited, like they'd just won the lottery. They were laughing, talking about business shares, board seats, and how they would now have responsibilities in the company. I just stood there trying to understand. I thought maybe I had missed something or someone forgot to tell me. So I waited. I waited for someone to say my name, to say, and of course you too. But my name wasn't said. Not once. They had been given shares of the company. Real shares. A guaranteed future. A place with purpose. And I was left standing like a stranger in my own family's home. I remember how quiet the room became when I finally asked, "What about me?" The silence was so loud. My uncle didn't look at me. My cousins looked away. And then my father cleared his throat and said something I will never forget. Something that still feels like a cut that hasn't healed. You just don't have the skills. And the company needs people who can actually handle things. Just like that. No discussion. No chance. No explanation except that. The words hit harder than I expected. I felt my stomach twist like my lungs forgot how to breathe. I didn't even know what to say. I had gone to the same schools. I had even worked part-time in the company office. I showed up. I learned. I tried. But somehow it didn't count. Not to them. From that moment, something inside me changed. Not anger. Not immediately. But a quiet disbelief, a kind of numbness that slowly turned into something else. I started questioning myself. Was I really less capable? Was I the weak link? Was I someone they saw as useless? But then I started noticing things more clearly. My cousins didn't work harder. They didn't study harder. They weren't more responsible, more talented, or more dedicated. The only difference was that they fit the image of what the family wanted the next generation to look like. They were louder, showy, always acting like they already owned the world. Meanwhile, I was the one who actually cared about doing things properly, quietly, respectfully. And I guess to them, that wasn't enough. Still, I didn't react. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in front of them. I remember nodding like I understood, like it didn't hurt, like I accepted their view of me. And I walked out of that room like everything was fine. But the moment I was alone, that's when the truth hit me. I had been excluded. By my own family. From a legacy I believed I was a part of. And the reason? Because they decided my value for me. I spent months after that questioning myself. My confidence, my direction, my future. Everyone else seemed to already know where they were going. They had guaranteed careers supported by the family name. And me? I felt like I had been cut off from the future I thought I was building toward. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It's painful, yes, but it also does something powerful. It lights something inside you. A kind of fire. A slow, steady burn that turns into determination. I could have accepted what they said. I could have let that define me. I could have given up and faded into the background like they expected. But I didn't. Because deep down I knew they were wrong. I didn't lack skills. I lacked opportunity. And the absence of support didn't mean the absence of potential. So I made a choice. If they didn't want me in the company, I would build something of my own. Not to compete. Not to prove anything to them. But to prove something to myself. And here's where everything really begins. Because what happened next? I hadn't expected. And neither had they. The journey wasn't easy and it definitely wasn't quick. I faced challenges I wasn't prepared for, setbacks that tested me, and moments where quitting felt easier. But I didn't. I kept going. And the moment things finally started shifting, the moment my work began to speak louder than the silence they left me with, that's when my family came back into the picture. Suddenly, I wasn't the one without skills anymore. Suddenly, I was someone they wanted. But after everything that happened, after being told I wasn't good enough to inherit the legacy, after learning how to build my own path brick by brick, the real question became, when they came back, what did I do? Did I accept them? Did I forgive them? Did I take the place they once denied me? Or did I choose something else entirely? I didn't sleep much the night everything changed. It was like my mind kept replaying that moment over and over. The room, the silence, the way no one looked at me, the way I suddenly felt like I didn't belong. I kept hearing those words, "You don't have the skills," echoing in my head. It was strange how such a simple sentence could shake everything you believed about yourself. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had been fooling myself this whole time. Wondering if maybe they had seen something in me that I hadn't. But even in those moments of doubt, there was another voice inside me, quiet, small but steady, telling me that the story wasn't finished. My grandfather had always treated me differently. Not in a negative way but in a thoughtful one. He didn't hand things to me the way he did with my cousins. He didn't just assume I wanted to be part of the business. He asked me questions. Real ones. Like what I enjoyed, what I wanted to build one day, what kind of legacy would make me proud to pass on. At the time, I didn't understand why he asked those things so seriously. I was just a kid. But now, looking back, I think he was trying to make me see something. Maybe even preparing me for something. He used to tell me this one thing over and over: your value is not in what others choose to give you. It's in what you choose to build with your own hands. At the time, it sounded like one of those wise sayings adults repeat when they want to sound deep. But now it felt like the only thing grounding me. Still, my grandfather wasn't the one running the company anymore. He had stepped back years before. My uncles, my father, and even some of my cousins had slowly taken more control. And the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't about legacy or hard work anymore. It was about control, image, and keeping power within certain hands. The type of family politics everyone sees in movies but never thinks could happen in their own home. Growing up, I had always been quieter than my cousins. While they bragged about cars, vacations, and connections, I was the one who stayed back in the office helping the staff organize files or taking extra shifts at the front desk. I liked learning how things worked behind the scenes. I wanted to understand every part of the company, not just the glamorous parts. But I guess no one noticed that. Or maybe they did and it didn't matter. I remember a moment from when I was younger that stands out now more than ever. It was the first time my grandfather took me to the company warehouse. Everyone else wanted to stay in the main office because that's where all the important-looking things happened. Meetings, suits, big decisions. But the warehouse was different. It was loud, busy, real. The workers there respected my grandfather deeply. He shook everyone's hand, remembered their names, asked about their families. And they smiled, genuine smiles. I never saw that kind of respect in the boardroom. On the drive back, I asked him why he treated everyone the same, whether they were running a department or sweeping the floor. He looked at me and said, "A company is only as strong as the people you don't see." That stayed with me. Maybe that was the difference between me and the rest of my family. They only wanted to be seen. I cared about what couldn't be seen, the foundation. But no one rewarded that. At least not back then. After I was excluded, I didn't know what to do next. I didn't want to stay in the house, but I also didn't know where else to go. So I started spending more time outside, walking, thinking, trying to clear the fog in my head. There was a small cafe near the edge of town that I had always avoided because it felt too quiet. But now, quiet was the only space where I could breathe. The cafe owner, an older woman named Ruth, recognized me after the second day. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was just taking a break from everything. She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. That was comforting somehow, someone understanding without needing every detail. I started bringing a notebook with me and wrote down ideas, thoughts, questions, anything my mind couldn't hold all at once. At first, it was just scattered words. Then it turned into sketches of products, concepts, business models, things I didn't even realize I had the knowledge to think through. Maybe I had absorbed more from being in that company environment than anyone realized. Or maybe I just needed space to hear my own thoughts without being overshadowed by everyone else. But as I explored new ideas, the distance between me and my family grew. My cousins had started calling themselves the next generation of leaders, posting about business meetings and entrepreneur life, even though most of their decisions were still being made for them. They were so busy trying to look successful that they didn't notice how disconnected they were becoming from the purpose behind the company in the first place. One evening, I overheard my father talking to someone on the phone, maybe my uncle. He said, "They'll grow into their roles. But as for the other one, well, not everyone is meant for leadership. We need to focus on those who strengthen the family image." That last part struck me. Family image. So that's what it came down to. Not ability. Not dedication. Not knowledge. Image. I didn't fit the picture they wanted to present to the world. I didn't talk loud enough. I didn't boast. I didn't show off. And because of that, I was considered weak. But something interesting began to happen in that quiet cafe. The more I worked, the more I wrote, the clearer things became. I didn't want their version of success. I didn't want to perform for approval. I didn't want to be accepted only once I looked a certain way. I wanted something real. Something I built myself. Something I could be proud of without needing anyone else's permission. And slowly an idea began to form. Something small at first, something that didn't look like much. But it was mine. And every day I added to it. Every day it grew, even if just a little. Meanwhile, my family didn't notice the change. They assumed I was just keeping myself busy until I eventually came around and accepted my place outside the company. They didn't know what I was building. They didn't ask. They didn't care. Not yet. But time has a way of revealing the things people try to overlook. And the moment my work finally stepped into the world, their silence turned into attention. And attention turned into concern. Then concern turned into something more complicated. Because the truth is, the story didn't end with me being left behind. It didn't happen overnight. I think it's easy to pretend everything changes in a single big moment, but real change is slow and quiet. It starts as a thought, then a feeling, then a decision. And then one day you realize you're somewhere new entirely. I began working from that small cafe like it was my personal office. The smell of fresh coffee, the low music, the soft clinking of mugs, it all gave me a calm space to think. I started researching industries that were growing fast, markets that were still developing, places where there was demand but not enough supply. I studied late into the night, and in the mornings I'd wake up early, still tired but full of purpose. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I was moving toward something. Meanwhile, life at home kept going like nothing had changed. My cousins continued being groomed for leadership. I heard bits and pieces about them working in different departments of the company, mostly as symbolic training. They showed up, sat in meetings, and took pictures to post online. They were more focused on being recognized than learning anything real. But the family was proud of them. They fit the part. They looked like young executives. And sometimes that's all people care about. I started noticing how my relationships at home shifted. My father seemed uncomfortable around me, like he didn't know how to talk anymore. My mother tried to pretend nothing was wrong, but even she spoke softly now, like she was afraid to upset something fragile. My cousins avoided bringing up the company when I was around, yet they looked at me like they thought I was jealous. I wasn't jealous. I was disappointed. There's a difference. It wasn't even about the company anymore. It was about how easily they decided my worth. How easily they erased my effort. How confidently they believed their judgment was final. But I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I didn't try to prove anything to them. Instead, I focused on building something new. The idea I had started forming was connected to a gap I noticed back in the warehouse when I was younger, the supply chain. There were constant delays, inefficiencies, wasted product, and no one ever addressed it because the company always prioritized the front-facing business. But the back end was where real power and growth lived. If someone could streamline that system, even on a smaller scale, it could change everything. So I began crafting a small logistics startup, just a concept at first, then a business plan, and eventually a real service. I reached out to small local businesses who didn't have big infrastructures. I offered reliable distribution and tracking at prices they could afford. A few said no, but some said yes, and that was enough. At first, I worked almost completely alone. I drove deliveries myself, often late into the night. I wrote invoices at the cafe table with tired hands. I researched packaging, transport networks, digital tracking systems. I made mistakes. Many. Some days I felt like I was walking backward. But something was growing. Slowly. Quietly. Still, I kept everything to myself. I didn't want my family to know. Not because I was hiding, but because I needed this to be mine, free of judgment, free of comparison, free of their expectations or lack of them. But secrets don't stay quiet forever. The first crack happened at a family dinner. My cousin Daniel, one of the loudest in the group, mentioned that he had heard from someone in town that I was running some kind of delivery service. He said it with a laugh, like it was a joke, like I was doing something small and petty. My father looked uncomfortable. My uncle raised an eyebrow. My grandfather, who had been mostly quiet these days, just watched me. I didn't respond. I just continued eating. But something in the room shifted. They weren't used to me not justifying myself. Later that night, my father came to my room. He didn't yell. He didn't question. He just stood there and said, "If you need help finding work, you only have to ask. There's no need to do this kind of thing." This kind of thing. That was when I realized they didn't just underestimate me, they pitied me. They thought I was struggling for scraps. They genuinely believed that the only future I could possibly have would be in the shadow of the family company. I didn't explain my plans. I didn't talk about contracts, growth projections, or market gaps. Because I knew they wouldn't hear me. Not yet. Instead, I just said, I know what I'm doing. But the truth was, I didn't know everything. I was figuring it out day by day. And sometimes figuring things out is the bravest part. As the months passed, the business grew faster than I expected. Word spread. More small companies reached out. Some bigger ones began to notice the reliability of the service. I hired 2 employees. Then 5. Then I moved operations from the cafe to a small rented workspace. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't polished. But it was real. And the more it grew, the more I started to hear my name again in the house. Not directly, but in whispers. In half-finished sentences. In glances during dinner. My cousins continued posting about business achievements they didn't actually earn. But now, whenever I walked into a room, I felt something new. Unease. Not from me, from them. They could feel the shift. And even though no one said it out loud, the balance was changing. There was one afternoon when I stopped by my grandfather's house alone. I hadn't spoken to him privately in months. He was sitting in the garden, the same place where he used to tell me those quiet lessons I didn't understand until now. He looked up at me with a calm expression, like he already knew why I had come. You've been building something, he said softly. I nodded. He didn't ask what. He didn't ask why. He simply said, good. That one word nearly broke me, because it was the first time in so long that I felt seen. But that moment didn't last long. Because change, especially in families, doesn't happen quietly. And the more my business grew, the more attention it drew, not just from customers but from people inside the company. And eventually, that attention turned into something far more complicated. Because one day, completely unplanned, something was brought to me that I never expected. A contract opportunity that directly crossed into the company's territory. Not a small one. A major one. One that could shift power. And suddenly, the line between being excluded and being seen wasn't just emotional anymore. It was business. And business, especially in families, never stays simple. That was the moment everything truly began to change. But what happened next reshaped everything in a way none of us saw coming. When that contract opportunity came my way, it didn't feel real at first. It was from a regional retailer, one that had recently grown very fast and was looking for a new logistics partner. The kind of contract that could change everything for a small company like mine. And the part that made my heart stop was that they had previously been working with my family's company. I remember sitting there, staring at the proposal email on my laptop, the cafe around me suddenly feeling too quiet. The wording was polite, professional, but clear. They weren't satisfied with the delays and disorganization from my family's supply chain department anymore. They wanted someone reliable, flexible, and attentive. Someone who cared about relationships, not just appearances. I read the email again and again. They came to me. Not because of our last name. Not because of the family legacy. But because of my work. But taking the contract would mean stepping directly into the same space my family operated in. It wouldn't just be business anymore. It would be conflict. A visible one. A public one. I closed my laptop that day without replying. I needed time to think. I needed to understand what this would mean. I walked outside, the air sharp and cool, my thoughts tangled. I kept hearing my grandfather's voice. Your value is in what you choose to build with your own hands. I had built something. Something real. But was I ready to defend it? The next few days were heavy. I moved around quietly, thinking through every angle. And in that time, I never mentioned the contract to anyone. Not my father, not my mother, not even Ruth at the cafe. I just carried it with me like a weight. But word travels fast in family circles even when you say nothing. A week passed before my father approached me again. This time he didn't speak gently. He didn't pretend to be calm. He came into my workspace, no call, no warning, and just stood there looking around at the desks, the whiteboards, the staff. You're growing this business, he said, like the word tasted strange in his mouth. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask why. He just asked one question. Are you trying to compete with us? For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The room felt like it held its breath. My employees quietly pretended not to hear anything, heads down, typing slowly. I finally said, no. I'm building my own path. But he didn't believe me. He leaned closer, his voice low. This family has supported you your whole life. You don't need to prove anything. Just come back. There's still a place for you. A place. A place they told me I didn't deserve. A place they had never offered until now. I looked at him and asked, and what place is that? He didn't answer. Because we both knew the answer didn't exist. After he left, the tension didn't leave with him. It multiplied. It was in the air, in my chest, in every step I took. I finally decided to respond to the retailer's email. I asked for a meeting, just a meeting, nothing final. I wanted to see if this opportunity was real, not just an emotional reaction or a chance thrown to me by luck. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. But before that day came, something else happened. My cousins began reaching out. At first, just messages, "Hey, we should talk," or "Haven't seen you around," or "Hope you're doing okay." None of them mentioned business. But the timing said everything. They sensed movement. They felt something shifting. Then Daniel called. The same cousin who once laughed at my delivery service. His tone was strangely friendly. "I heard you're doing well," he said. Then more carefully, "Maybe we should work together sometime." I didn't respond to that suggestion. I just listened to the silence that followed. Because he knew it too, this wasn't a friendly conversation. It was fear. The night before my meeting with the retailer, I barely slept. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something huge. Not victory, not defeat, just change. The kind of change that makes your life split into a before and after. The next morning, I arrived at their office early. I sat in the lobby, hands folded, heart steady but heavy. A representative stepped out, greeted me warmly, and led me into a conference room. We talked for almost 2 hours. About distribution routes, communication systems, scalability, long-term planning. They didn't treat me like someone small. They treated me like a professional, an equal, someone capable. But the most surprising moment came near the end, when the representative leaned forward, lowered her voice slightly and said, "We've also been approached by your family's company. They offered us a new contract this week. They want us to stay." My chest tightened, but she continued, "But we see something in what you're building. Something they've forgotten." She didn't say what that something was. She didn't need to. I already knew. Care, effort, vision, integrity. Things that don't show up in boardroom photos or confident speeches. We ended the meeting with a handshake. No final agreement yet, just a shared understanding. But when I walked out of that building, I knew my family knew about the meeting. They had moved fast to secure what they thought was theirs. They were reacting, not leading. And that shift meant everything. That evening, I got a call from my grandfather. He rarely called anymore. His voice was quiet, tired, but steady. "I need to see you," he said. "Come to the house. Tonight." I felt the world slow down for a moment. I didn't know if he was calling me as my grandfather, or as the founder of the company I had been pushed out of. Either way, I went. I walked into the house and saw my entire family sitting in the living room. My father, my uncles, my cousins, all silent, waiting. My grandfather was at the head of the room in his old chair, hands folded. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. And in that stillness, before anyone spoke, before any decisions were made, I realized something. This was no longer about business contracts or logistics or shares. This was about identity, belonging, respect, and the weight of a legacy that was never just theirs to define. The air felt heavy enough to break. And what happened in that room next is where everything changed. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Everyone was watching me, but no one was speaking. My grandfather looked at me longer than anyone else. His eyes were older than I remembered, softer too, but still sharp enough to see through people. He motioned for me to sit, and I did, right across from him. He took his time before speaking, letting the silence settle like dust. "I've heard about the contract," he finally said. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't disappointed. It was simply knowing. My father and uncles shifted in their seats, like they had been waiting for him to say it. But then my grandfather said something none of us expected. "You did good." The room froze. My father stared at him. My uncles exchanged looks. My cousins looked confused, like they didn't understand how those words could even exist in this context. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. I just listened. "You built something real," my grandfather continued. "Not because you were given the chance, but because you made the chance yourself." My father cut in, his voice tight. "Dad, this is not about praise. This is about the business. There are lines that cannot be crossed." Grandfather turned his head slowly toward him. "And who drew those lines?" he asked. The question hung in the air, sharp and heavy. My father didn't answer. My uncle tried instead. "We have to protect the company, the brand, the family image. We can't have competition coming from inside our own house. People will talk. People will talk." Those words again. Everything they did was about appearance. About being seen as a perfect family with unity and power. Truth didn't matter. Reality didn't matter. Only perception. My grandfather exhaled, long and tired. The company was built to provide, not to control. Then, slowly he looked back at me. Tell me what you want. Not what they wanted. Not what the family expected. What I wanted. But before I could speak, before I could even process the question, another voice came from the corner of the room. It was Daniel. The problem, he said, his tone colder than I had ever heard it, is that this was never just about work. You may pretend it is, but we all know why you're doing this. I turned to him, confused. Why? He leaned forward. Because you think the company should have been yours. The room went still again, but this time the silence was different. This time the tension felt like it could break something. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could defend myself or deny anything, Daniel continued. You think Grandpa favored you. You think you were supposed to be the heir. And when you didn't get it, you decided to take revenge by starting a business that would challenge us. It was the first time anyone had said the quiet part out loud. The fear behind all their reactions. The thing none of them could admit. They believed I was a threat. Not because I had tried to be one, but because I had grown without them. My grandfather closed his eyes for a moment, like the weight of the situation had finally reached him. But then, just when I thought the conversation had hit its peak, something happened that none of us saw coming. The door to the room opened and a lawyer walked in. Not just any lawyer, grandfather's personal attorney. Everyone straightened in their seats. My cousins looked panicked. My father's jaw tightened. The lawyer carried a folder. My grandfather didn't look away from me as he spoke softly. It's time you all know the truth. My heart started beating faster. The air changed. My cousins stiffened. But then my grandfather looked at the lawyer and said something I wasn't ready for. Bring out the revised succession documents. Succession documents. The ones that determine ownership, shares, control, legacy. The same legacy I had been denied. My father shot to his feet. No. We already handled this. We finalized the distribution years ago. There is nothing to bring out. The lawyer did not stop walking. My grandfather's voice, though soft, cut through the room like a blade. I changed them. No one moved. No one breathed. My cousin's eyes went wide. My uncles leaned forward in disbelief. My father looked like the ground beneath him had shifted. But I was just sitting there, still, caught between shock and something else I couldn't name yet. The lawyer placed the folder on the table. And that moment, right there, was the second shift. Because this wasn't just about being excluded anymore. This wasn't just about starting my own company. This wasn't just about proving myself. This was about the legacy itself. There's everything that came before. And everything that was about to change. The folder wasn't opened yet. No one knew what was inside. Not the numbers. Not the names. Not the shares. Not the future. But we all understood one thing. Whatever was inside that folder would change everything. And no one in that room, especially me, was ready for what came next. The lawyer's hands moved slowly as he opened the folder, as if he knew the weight of the moment better than any of us. My cousins leaned forward, waiting to see how secure their futures still were. My father watched with the tight, frozen expression of someone who had believed the world was firmly under his control. My grandfather kept his eyes on me, steady and sure. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. The first lines were formal, legal language. But the meaning came quickly. My grandfather had restructured the ownership of the company. The shares were no longer divided among just my father, my uncles, and my cousins. A portion, significant enough to shift power, had been allocated to me. The room erupted. My cousins protested first. Their voices overlapped, angry and frantic. My father and uncle stood, talking over each other, trying to regain control of the moment. It was loud, chaotic, emotional. But my grandfather didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke when the noise finally burned itself out. This company was built on work, on respect, on integrity, not on who talks the loudest, not on who looks successful. He pointed a finger to the floor, steady. The one who understands the value of effort is the one who should shape the future of what I built. My father shook his head. You can't just rewrite everything based on sentiment. My grandfather turned to him. This isn't sentiment. It's correction. Silence again. Heavy. Sure. My cousins stared at me like they were seeing me for the first time, not as someone they ignored or underestimated, but as someone who now had influence. Someone they could no longer pretend was small. I felt my heart beating fast, but not from shock anymore. From realization. From clarity. But then I spoke, my voice steady. I'm not here to take your place. I didn't build my business to replace this company. I built it because I had to learn who I was without it. Their anger didn't disappear. But something shifted. A wall cracked. Then the unexpected part came. I turned to my grandfather, not the family, not the room, and I said, I accept the shares, but I'm not taking a position in the company. Everyone froze again. My cousins blinked. My father stared. Even my grandfather looked surprised for the first time that night. I continued, you taught me to build something with my own hands. That's what I'm doing. That's what I want to continue doing. I don't want to come back to something that never wanted me there. I want to move forward with what I've created. The words felt final. Real. True. But then I added the twist. But I am willing to partner. My company can work with yours, if we treat each other with respect. Not family hierarchy. Not image. Just business done right. No one spoke for a long time. It was my grandfather who finally nodded, slow and proud. That is the leadership I hoped you would find. My father didn't nod. He didn't smile. But he didn't argue either. And sometimes, silence is its own kind of acceptance. My cousins didn't congratulate me. But the hostility in their eyes changed into something more cautious. They understood now that ignoring me was no longer possible. Dismissing me was no longer an option. I had earned my place, not because it was given but because I created it. That night when I left the house, the air felt different. The sky seemed wider. My steps felt steady, grounded. But just as I reached the front gate, my grandfather called out one last time. There's one more thing, he said. I turned curious. He smiled the smallest smile. The warehouse, the one we visited when you were young. It's yours now. To run as you see fit. Consider it a bridge between what I built and what you are building. That was the twist I never expected. Not shares. Not power. But the part of the company that meant something real. The foundation. I nodded, not with pride, not with triumph, but with understanding. The legacy wasn't the company name. The legacy was the work. And now I could choose exactly what to do with it. The story didn't end with revenge or takeover or replacing anyone. It ended with clarity. With rebuilding. With growth. But in the quiet of that moment, I also understood something else. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one. One where I was no longer the one left out. I was the one who stepped forward, on my own terms. When I reached home that night, the world felt quieter than usual. The hallway lights were soft, the air still, like everything had paused to let me process what happened. I sat down on the couch without turning on the TV, letting the silence settle. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was fighting to prove anything. I wasn't trying to make anyone notice me. I wasn't chasing validation. I had already built something of my own, and now my grandfather had offered something that connected my past to my future. It wasn't a gift most people would understand, but I understood it perfectly. He was giving me the place where he began. The foundation of his dream. And in a way he was trusting me to decide what legacy meant. The next morning I went to the warehouse. The sun was still low, turning the sky orange and gold. I hadn't been there in so many years, but when I stepped inside it felt familiar. The smell of wood, dust, and oil. The open space that once felt endless when I was a kid. I remembered watching my grandfather walk across the floor, greeting workers by name, asking about their families, checking machines himself because he believed leadership meant showing up. I realized, standing there, that this was the version of him that shaped me more than he ever knew. Not the businessman from the big office. The man who believed in work. I walked the length of the warehouse slowly, imagining what it could become. A training space. A distribution center. A new branch for my own business. Or something entirely different that connected both worlds. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I didn't need to rush. For once, time didn't feel like something I was running against. It felt like something I had earned. Later that week, my father called. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. His voice was calmer than I expected. No frustration. No pride. Just real human quiet. He told me he needed time to understand everything. He said he didn't want to lose his relationship with my grandfather. And then he surprised me by saying he didn't want to lose his relationship with me either. The words didn't solve years of distance or hurt, but they opened a door. And sometimes doors matter more than apologies. We agreed to meet for dinner. It wasn't emotional or dramatic. It was just two people talking, learning how to stand in the same space without past conversations hanging heavy in the air. We didn't mention the company or the shares. We talked about everyday things. It felt small, but small things can be the start of something better. My cousins were slower to adjust. Some stayed distant. Some reached out, not warmly but respectfully. And that was enough. I wasn't looking for their friendship. I just wanted peace. And over time the tension faded. Not because anything was forced, but because people eventually learned to accept the things they cannot change. My relationship with my grandfather grew stronger. We spent more time together. Sometimes discussing business, sometimes talking about life, sometimes just sitting quietly without needing to fill the silence. He had always been the anchor in this story, even when I didn't see it clearly. He wasn't just trying to correct the way the family saw me. He was ensuring I never forgot the importance of building something of my own, not just inheriting what was already there. Months passed and I began renovating the warehouse. I brought in my own team and included some workers who had been there for years and were still loyal to my grandfather. I listened more than I spoke. I asked questions. I planned slowly. I didn't want it to be just another business expansion. I wanted it to become a place that meant something. A place where people could come in with no connections, no advantages, no name to rely on, and still build something meaningful. Just like I did. When the new site finally opened, my grandfather attended the launch. He stood next to me, leaning on his cane, watching everything with quiet pride. My father came too. He didn't say much, but he was there, and sometimes presence speaks louder than words. I gave a short speech, not about success or wealth or where I ranked in the family. I spoke about growth. About learning to become someone your younger self would be proud of. About rebuilding your own story even when no one believes in you. The room was silent when I finished, and the applause came slowly, warmer than I expected. Life didn't become perfect after that. Family still had complicated moments. Business still required work and patience. But the weight I used to carry, the doubt, the pressure, the feeling of being overlooked, was no longer controlling me. I had stepped into my own identity, not in reaction to the family but independent of it. Over time, my father and I found a rhythm. Not the relationship I once wanted, but a new one built on mutual respect instead of expectation. My cousins and I never became close, but we learned how to talk without competition or resentment. And my grandfather? He continued to be the quiet compass I looked to when I needed perspective. The real resolution didn't come from the shares or the warehouse or any business success. It came from learning that acceptance doesn't always arrive in the ways you imagine. Sometimes it comes quietly, slowly, in moments, not gestures. And the biggest lesson was this. Your worth was never something someone else was supposed to grant. It was something you were always meant to build. In the end, I didn't become the heir to a legacy. I became the author of my own. And that was enough. The story ends here, not with rivalry or revenge, but with growth, understanding, and a new beginning. A reminder that sometimes life leads you away from the place you thought you belonged, only to bring you back stronger, wiser, and ready to stand on your own terms.